I actually want to take a second to turn it over to our panelists today. If you all can just share your name, if you could put it into one sentence, what you do, what lights you up in your work, that would be great. So I'm just going to go based on who I see kind of in order, which is Nicole. So, Nicole, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Letitia, for the warm welcome and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm excited for our conversation today. I'm Nicole. I'm a DEI and talent development consultant with Perfecta. What excites me is working with ERGs and DEI councils and executive sponsors to help just build more inclusive and equitable cultures. And so, with that, I will pass it over to Kenya, who's next for me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kenya Reynolds, and I work with Perfecta in the infrastructure and operations role as a consultant with them. What actually lights me up about it is being the behind the scenes wizard, if you will. Imagine me as the wizard behind the curtain. I love all things systems and process. I love infrastructure and setting up organizations for success. So that's where I lean in here with Perfecta. And I want to welcome everyone and thank Letitia for this opportunity. And I'm going to pass it over to Alicia.
Thanks, Kenya. Good morning, everyone. I am Alicia. I am an HR consultant here at Perfecta, mainly focusing on very similar to Kenya, so kind of in the infrastructure build, mainly hiring and onboarding, and some other processes. What lights me up is really just allowing founders to breathe, helping them take the moment to build process to become more efficient, but also so they can take some of that off their plate and to see the efficiency being increased operationally. I will kick it off to Dr. Holly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Holly Davis, and I'm the Learning and Development Facilitator for Perfecta. And one thing that really I have a passion for is developing really taking really complex topics and breaking them down so adults can learn new skills, specifically professional development skills. And so that's I really love just being an educator in that way. And so I'm excited to be here and share my thoughts on RTO.
Thank you. Okay, I think that was everyone. So, a little bit about the work that we do at Perfecta. If you are new to Perfecta, we are so happy to meet you. Perfecta is short for Performance Equity and Talent. So, essentially, we are a leadership, talent, and learning boutique consultancy. We work with companies that are committed to building high performing and also inclusive workplace cultures, because both of those things can exist. So, we get to be our trusted advisors to our clients, strategists, thought partners, much, much more than consultants. We really work with our clients hands on, making sure that the work that we do leaves them in a much better place. So we get to travel all over the country. Nicole just got back from Anaheim, and I just got back from I was in Charlotte, North Carolina last week. We're currently in Philadelphia right now with insurance clients. So we get to really bring this work to life by facilitating retreats, summits for ERG leaders, for DEIB councils, for HR leaders, and so on and so forth. And why we're talking about RTO, for those of you that are just joining, is because all of our clients at Perfecta, and I just want to make sure that anyone that's joining and feeling maybe a bit concerned or uncertain about this work, all of our clients are still committed to building inclusive and equitable workplace cultures. This work is not going anywhere. Don't let the news and the headlines fool you. If a company wants to keep their high performers, if they want to make sure that their work is being done, if they want to make sure that their employees are being supported and invested in and nurtured, then trust me, they have to do this work. And so a big, big, big part and theme of what we're seeing to be extremely important this particular year, given everything that's happening societally and around the world, is trust, right? We spend over a third of our lives at work. We absolutely deserve to have employers that do care about us and show that care through learning, through development, right? Through empowerment. And so, as you all in your respective roles are likely here pouring into your colleagues, pouring into your teams. You're here because you probably really care about the state of society as well as the state of the company culture and the work that you do. We want to take this next hour to pour into you. So as I mentioned at the beginning, please, please, please have your notebook ready. Feel free to take notes. Stay until the end. We do have a freebie gift for all of you joining. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alicia.
Thank you so much, Letitia. So during today's call, we're going to discuss kind of three main veins. The first will be outdated return to work or return to office, as we have said, RTO, return to office assumptions, hurting engagement. So why does, how do we course correct? Why do these things happen? Why do the conflicts potentially happen? And then we're also going to define and operationalize a high performing culture. So, what does a good performing hybrid environment look like? And then, lastly, what kind of break down the role of leaders and managers in translating these cultural values in everyday behaviors? So, not only taking it from the beginning, what does it look like? Why there may be problems that happen? How do we define what a good hybrid environment looks like, and then the roles of managers and leaders in that translation to cultural values? Thank you. Dr.
All
Holly, I
right.
think this is you.
Yes. Thanks, Alicia. So, as you can see, there is the data that's trending out right now about RTO is that more companies are leaning towards return to office policies. So, right here in this first point, it says nearly half companies will require employees to be in the office at least 4 days a week in 2026, and three in 10 companies won't allow remote work at all. And then in the second point, companies that plan to increase office days say they are doing so to improve productivity and company culture. And then at this last point, most companies don't provide incentives for employees to work from the office. And so as we can see here, with these trends, which are all this data is from Resume Builder, I just want to know from the audience, like your thoughts, like is 4 days too many? Should we lean to 3 days? Just want to know everyone's thoughts. It's like, okay, Alicia. So I'm sorry, Letitia. Okay, so it says, how do you feel about the increase in return to office mandates? Does the shift feel necessary? Let us know in the chat.
Got one comment in the chat that says 4 days is way too much. Is there a number of days that you all feel comfortable with? And for those of you all that I guess are moving back to RTO, did your employer share any specific reasoning about it, or was it just like, everybody gets to be in the office? Hope I never have to RTO. Remote work allows me to live happily wherever I want. Our organization shifted to 3, and many feel that is too much. Just reading through some of these comments. Mandatory office days feel unnecessary if the work is getting done. 2 to 3 days is reasonable. So some of you all are kind of like 2 to 3 days a week is okay, right? The reasoning was team collaboration and being more effective. And then employer complained about paying for office space that wasn't fully utilized. So we are going back in office March 2nd. Anyone else? Any other thoughts, feedback? Who was on board with RTO? Sarah said, I prioritize seeking remote jobs and would seek other employment if I had to RTO. And honestly, it does make sense, just with like more intentional development of RTO. We can unsee what we've seen. We can't unsee what we've seen. Mainly that we've been productive out of the office. Fair point. Charlene, you hit the nail on the head here. The focus should be on what's the best way to get teams working collaboratively. And then RTO should be based on teamwork. Sounds like some of your employers are saying the quiet part out loud, which is, hey, we've been paying for this space. Y'all need to come use it because we're wasting money. A better way to approach it, we're going to really dive into in our conversation today. All right, wonderful. Please continue to drop your questions, comments in the chat. We are going to shift into a conversation or Q&A with our panelists. As I shared before, we want you all to be a part of this conversation just as much. Think of this as your group chat coming to life. We are just having conversations. We hope that you can take this information, take it back to your employer, take it back to your leader, find some new ways to think about implementing this in a way that will work well for everyone. A couple of things that I do want to note here is that, see, we are not here to bash RTO. That's not what this is about, because some of y'all might want to be in the office, and that's valid. Some of you all might not really have a choice in the matter, right? And that's valid too. But connection is real. What we are here to talk about is if you're going to bring people back, how do you do it in a way that actually works? How can companies avoid losing their best people? And how do we make sure that this does not backfire? So that's what this incredible team is going to break down for you today. And trust me, they are going to come with the insights, the stories, and the real talk. So let's get into it. Alicia, I think the first question is for you. Oh,
Yeah.
actually, I'm going to stop sharing because I don't need to anymore.
Yes. So the first question that was posed to us was, what are some outdated beliefs about return to office or workplace culture that you still hear from leaders, and how would you recommend those leaders respond to it? For me, I hear this often. And so I want to break it down, and I'll just say the top three that I feel. There are, opinions are opinions. So there could be some that weigh heavier for others than, what I'm going to say. But what I think the top three are: first, bringing everybody back into the office, culture automatically improves and people return. It's the we're going to get together and everything's just going to be great. And so for me, I like to tell people that culture does not live in a building. It shows up in your behaviors, your systems, your leadership decisions. So that's when you think just bringing everybody together is going to solve the issue, it can often backfire because proximity can support culture. It's not that it can't, but it doesn't create it on its own. And so if a culture already feels weak, return to office is often sometimes expected to do the work that it was never designed to do. And so that's where you have those issues that come up. The second belief the outdated belief is that visibility equals productivity. And we just talked about that in the chat, right? The belief, I feel like that belief is more rooted in comfort of leadership than actual performance. It's the thought that if you can't see the employees, they're not working. And for employees, that's often seen as a lack of trust. It's not necessarily a valid reason or taken as a valid reason as to why they should return to office. Many organizations never clearly define what success looks like once you're back in office. And so it's everybody come back, we're just going to work. But what does that look like to be successful now that things have changed, right? And so it's more about being present, and how that presence becomes stand-in for clarity where expectations aren't clear. And then my last belief is that I want to state is that collaboration improves without redefining how the work happens. So we're just going to bring everybody together. They're going to work together. All is going to be great. But it doesn't talk about the how that's going to happen. Is if we're bringing everybody back and they're still in virtual calls, but you're in the same office, how does that affect culture? Now, I've worked for places where everybody was spread across North America. So virtual calls was a normal part of the culture. So it depends on the makeup of your company, on what that looks like. But really, it's just making sure that leaders, they say what they want collaboration to look like. It can't always be defined as we're just going to figure it out as we go. No, that's not. You should have a plan. Clarify expectations, let people know their decision rights, meaning who has the rights to make what decisions. And I don't mean rights meaning your opinion is not valued, but like authority levels. Almost think of it as a responsibility matrix so that it's clear these, depending on your level in the organization or your role in a project, you have the right to make the following decisions. And then communicate norms. Going forward, these are norms for the office. Because as we think about it, we've all been in our homes or in our favorite coffee shops, wherever you choose to work, because I'm known to work at a coffee shop now. And so we have our own expectations of how we work individually. And so when you come into an office and you're now everybody's working in their own regard, but together, it can cause some issues. And so we need to treat return to office as a supportive strategy, not a corrective one. This isn't a punitive, you come in or else. And it goes back to, and I would have to go to look in the chat who said it, but it's really about how we do the work to be productive, not a just, we got to pay for this bill and bring everybody in. Well, how? What happens when they're all here? Do you have enough desks for them? Do you have enough space for them? Like those are questions that have to be done. So it really should be a focus on the benefits to the organization and the employee, is what leaders should really focus on. The why we're bringing back, shifting the mindset and the strategy from where work happens, meaning we're just coming to the office, to how do we actually get it done once we're here. And then again, it's all about clarifying those expectations, those communications. What is now the new norm? It has to support culture and it has to be intentionally designed, and just assuming we'll figure it out once we get everybody there. So for me, when it's done with intentionality, that's when you see less resistance in some cases, right? But post COVID, we were working with a whole new rhythm, so we have to be more intentional about how we're bringing people back because people's lives are different. We never experienced. Now we know pretty much anything. I shouldn't say all, but many jobs that could not be done remotely could not, and I will say in quotes, done remotely, including human resources, went remote, right? And so it can be. So how do we bring it back? How do we make it, if it's part of your culture that you want to be more service oriented or more client facing or whatever that looks like, great. But a lot of it is the how you communicate that to your employees and what benefits you are going to have for them to come back. What is the incentive? Because everybody's comfortable in their homes and their coffee shops and their wherever. So it has to make sense. So I'll stop and pause for questions or anything. And Letitia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Alicia. That was amazing. And I will say you are always in a coffee shop. I thought I was a coffee shop girly, but you live in a coffee
I do. I love
shop.
a good black coffee, just gets me through the day.
Oh my goodness, so many gems from that. And I just want to shout out everybody in the chat here. Supportive strategy, not a corrective one. Love this. Erica said, yes, in person should support strategy and planning across teams. Outside of that, let me cook. Casey, I feel like if you're requiring people to be in office for a period of time, off hours communication should become almost non-existent. And if you're removing flexibility, it should work both ways. So I think that really just kind of highlights to what you said, Alicia. It has to benefit employees. We can't just say, hey, everybody's back in the office, but really taking the time to prepare on what those norms are, talking about the why, right? Being really intentional about how you're actually designing cultures. And then I really love your point about culture does not live in a building. So, so, so true. Okay, so here's the thing. A lot of companies are saying we need RTO to rebuild our culture. And I get it, culture matters. However, are they actually doing the work or are they just expecting people to show up and then poof, culture happens? Spoiler, it does not work like that. So, Nicole, this question is for you. What's actually missing when leaders try to rebuild culture through RTO? And let's be really honest here, who's getting left behind in these conversations?
Thank you so much, Letitia and Alicia. I'm just going to build on a lot of what you already shared at the beginning, but I would say the number one thing that's missing when companies are saying that they're bringing people back to rebuild culture is a plan to do that, right? So, as Letitia mentioned, it doesn't just happen magically just because people are showing up at the office. You know, a lot of the organic ways that we used to engage with one another have eroded over time as we've moved remote fully or completely hybrid. We've all kind of gotten used to our own way of working and being heads down. Perhaps you still have people who are, in many multiple different offices, even though you're back in your office. So the number one thing is companies need to actually have a plan around this and not fully rely on just bottoms up efforts to pop up overnight. And I would actually say that this is actually a really exciting opportunity for companies right now to reinvest in building cultures. And so Perfecta is really excited to partner with companies to help you build out what that could look like for you, working with different executive sponsors across your group, and just really building out programming and initiatives that will start building back connection amongst your employees, deepening employee experience, strengthening, perhaps your employee resource group communities and how they're each connected with one another. And there's just so much that can be done right now. The other thing that is really missing right now when companies are planning for return to office is um, there's certain groups that are perhaps, not being captured in terms of how exceptions might be thought out for your company. So one, example is caregivers right now. I'm currently a breastfeeding mom, so working from home for me provides me a lot more flexibility and less of a headache versus having to go into the office every single day and pump. And a lot of caregivers, experience that same challenge, regardless of the age of your children. You require certain flexibility and things with picking up, dropping off all of your children's activities. And if a company is going to be saying, you're required to be back in the office, but they're not thinking through and communicating what flexibility will actually look like and training managers to support that flexibility for certain groups, then what happens is your employees are actually going to be like stressed, burnt out, not as engaged, and it actually does the opposite of like building back engagement and culture. And so, that is another really big area that we're partnering with companies on to just think through strategically some of those groups that might be invisibly or adversely affected with some of these return to office mandates, and just how do you support your teams and managers to build out thoughtful processes that are going to enable more flexibility for certain groups that might need exceptions. So, yeah, that's a little bit about kind of what we're seeing in this space right now. And like I said, I think the biggest takeaway is just there's such a big opportunity right now for companies to reinvest in building back some of this culture that may have been lost over these few years.
Nicole, thank you so much. It is important to think about flexibility and who are we leaving out by requiring RTO. And Alicia said the school pickup line. Whew. So we've talked about what's not working. Now let's flip it because there are leaders and companies that are out here getting it right. Nicole, you said that there's an opportunity here. Sometimes it is easy to say, oh, let's look at how hard this is. But on the flip side, there's an opportunity. So I really want to hear from any of our panelists today. What does it actually look like to build an engaged, connected culture in a hybrid setup? Give us some examples. Who wants to jump in?
I can jump in. So I always think about, as an extreme extrovert who has a sister who's an extreme introvert, I always think about the differences between how people receive office spaces, right? Because a lot of places like the open office space, so everybody can see everybody and everybody feels collaborative. And so what I've seen is places that have brought people back to work and they've said, I've seen a couple of things. I've seen if they didn't have enough workspace for everyone to be in office on one day, maybe it was on a rotation based on teams that had to work together. So you're only really in office with the people that you really need to do work with. And so it was kind of like an ease in, like it wasn't ripping the band-aid. I've also seen where if they didn't have enough space, there was like, it wasn't what we would normally say like a desk. Like you didn't have like your personal belongings on there. It was more of like a workspace share. And so you shared it with the same people. So you almost had like a desk buddy, kind of like when we were back in school. But um, it, it allowed you to share space with someone that you know, like you can build that relationship with, right? Because you guys are sharing that common workspace. But then also, I've seen things such as like quiet areas, because again, and I put that notion in the chat that a lot of it is like I think of people like my sister who are very introverted, and an open office layout is the opposite of what they want. And so they've been at home minding their business, working well, and now they have to come back to an office where it may be loud, overstimulating. I'm not going to just say introverts, I'm going to say those that are neurodivergent. Just all the things that can that once you bring people back in the office can stir up. And so having those things, not only what Nicole mentioned, but things like a quiet room where someone can go de-stress for a second if it's too loud. I've seen those things that have worked very well. So just being intentional, thinking about not only the things that are seen, but also going back to what Nicole said, the more invisible items that we don't always think about, but they were planned out with the employees in mind. And although yes, the transition is always going to be a little rough, right? We're coming back into a situation that we haven't been in a long time, but it wasn't as rough as it could be because they took the time to walk through that, to plan through that.
Thanks,
And I'd like
Alicia.
to,
Oh, go ahead, Kenya.
I was going to say, I'd like to piggyback off of a little of what Alicia was just mentioning. One of the things that I think I've seen is when companies are intentional about how they bring people back into the office, like having clear functions around collaboration days. So, like, you're coming into the office on Tuesdays, that means those are the working session days so that people don't feel as though they're spending a lot of unnecessary time in the office, but they're actually focused on getting some like heavy things done. Since a lot of companies are really saying that coming back into the office is about collaboration, so then spend the time when they come into the office doing the collaboration points, actually getting together and doing some of the work that feels better and works better when you're in a group setting together versus trying to do them on like virtual whiteboards and things of that nature. So I've seen some companies that have really focused heavily on that. They've also spent a lot of time focusing on the team building things that can work when you come back together in the office. So maybe they do a group lunch. They're doing something where like they're bringing people together, small activities and things, nothing big all the time because we know budgets are always a thing, but being mindful and intentional about why you're bringing people into the office. And again, having like that rotating schedule is also helpful because most offices don't always have enough desk space for everyone. Even if we were already all in office before, you definitely didn't have enough desk space for everyone. So having like a system where people can reserve the desk space that they are looking to have when they have to come into the office, what teams are coming into the office and when, how are they working together? Is everyone coming in that sits on floor 6 versus floor 8? Like, what does that look like and how do they do that? So I think companies are really, those who are getting it right are being intentional about what they're doing.
Thanks, Kenya. All right, I'm going to turn this next question over to Dr. Holly. For organizations that are struggling with engagement post RTO, what's one low lift change they can make that builds trust or connection fast?
I think one low lift change that an organization can do, I think, is look at how the RTO policy or changes were communicated and circle back to any feedback that they received from the employees. Because I think in a lot of cases, when it comes to these RTO changes, employees can feel like it's just happening like to them, but they weren't like a part of that process. There was no collaboration. And I always think that leaders can take those extra steps to build that psychological safety, to have the employees feel respected and included in that process by, if you're going to do a survey, circle back to, hey, these are the themes that we heard. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're working on. This is why we can't do that. Here are some alternatives. I think that's just really that transparency and communication on what's happening. I think employees can at least feel that there's acknowledgement in terms of like their needs or the direction that the company's taking as to why they're having this return to office policy. So I'm always big on what's been communicated and looking back, like in hindsight, what can be improved upon, or what can we do different next time, so employees aren't feeling unheard or that they can't trust leadership.
Amazing. Thanks, Dr. Holly. All right, so we are going to open it up to everyone joining. You all get your questions ready. Go ahead and start dropping those questions in the chat. I don't know if you're thinking, okay, what do I do from here? How do I take this back to my leaders? I do want to just get a show of hands. You can say yes in the chat, or you can use the hand raising function in Zoom. How many of you all are managers that may have to communicate RTO to your team? Do we have any managers in here? If you are, say yes in the chat. Use a hand raising option. Just want to get a feel for who's here. Okay, so you do have some managers in here, and that is one of the most challenging pieces of leadership in managing a team, is that your team is going to look for you for answers and support. And sometimes you are the one responsible for really funneling information from the top down to your team. With that being said, I do want to, let's see, ask a question. Alicia, I want to start with you and then open it up to the group here if anyone else wants to add. Um, let's say that you're the one who has to deliver the news. You're the one managing emotions. Maybe there's some frustration, maybe there's some pushback, and that's not easy. So, how should people leaders navigate that? How do you communicate that without eroding trust?
It's a great question, Letitia. So first, I always like to point out that pushback typically isn't about defiance. It typically is a result of uncertainty, inconsistent communication, or a loss of trust. So it's not just flat out, I don't want to do it, I hate it, whatever. There's usually a reason. The root cause is usually one of those. And so I always tell people, lead with clarity. Now, are you able to tell, sometimes the organization may not be able to share every single, granular detail of the return to office, but I feel like a lot of times when it's rolled out, it's not as communicative as it should be. One, I think the communication should be led with kindness and grace, because of the nature, any kind of change, it's human nature to go, ooh, change, wait a minute, hold on, what are we doing? Most people don't embrace change well. Now, I don't mind it, but I also am probably going to have some follow-up questions. This is just the nature of who I am. But so you have to kind of think about everybody in the room. What I would recommend is almost that the organizations think of the personas of their employee group and kind of make communication across those. So the person that is, I don't want to say the worry wart because I sound like my mom, but the person that's going to have 85,000 questions because they're like, I don't know, this is freaking me out, I have all the questions. Ask those. Ask have communication for the person that immediately, nope, I don't like it, I don't want to do it. You need to be able to dig in and see why. Have the person that, kind of what Kenya was talking about and Nicole talking about, the caregiver, right? The person that, we know what's happening in our community or in our employee group. So how is that going to affect their lives? That's going to look different than, say, somebody who doesn't have any children or doesn't have to caregive, but just doesn't want to, they enjoy their, autonomy. So you kind of have to understand who's in your employee population and be able to speak to their story, if you will. And that's why I said personas, because you're not going to reach every single person, but you can get most of the groups that are involved. Lead with clarity, be honest why the decision is happening. You have to tell employees what the benefit is. Just we're all coming into the office because I need to see you is not, to me, that's not good enough. It needs to be, is it operationally going to be efficient or, good for the company? Is it, we're really trying to, maybe what Kenya was talking about, focusing on those collaborative work sessions. We really want to, have innovation be at the forefront. And so we want to have those items. You need to be telling also the employees what resources you're going to have in place to help them with this adjustment. Whether it be you have a counselor on site, a therapist on site, as many places do, whether you have a quiet room, a nursing room, a child care center, whatever that may look like for the respective organization. But companies cannot expect for employees to just come back to the same building they came back beforehand with no extra benefits. Our rhythm and how we work in our lives are different post COVID. And so you have to be able to meet your employees at least part of the way, right? Extend the olive branch, be intentional. Be explicit about, and it goes back to what Dr. Holly said, what you can meet and what you can't meet. Some things people are like, I want a Starbucks in the office. Okay, that's not a non-negotiable. That's just you wanting a Starbucks, and so it just meaning communicating. We hear you. I would like a Starbucks as well. However, we can't do that, And so so people feel heard, but they also understand that not everything can be met. But being flexible where they can. If somebody's like, oh, I can't do 8:30 because I got to drop my kids off. Can I work a 9 to 6? If that's not going to hurt the sales of your business, let them work their 9 to 6. Like, what are we talking about? You know what I'm saying? Like, just be flexible. And it's the notion of, and I would challenge I would even put the managers through training, right? Because what it looks like to manage someone now is different. Situational leadership is even more needed in today's world because not everybody is going to need the same management style. Not everybody needs the same communication style. Not everybody needs the same feedback loop style. Like, you can build processes, but how it's delivered can be different to meet the need of your employees. And so taking in not just the initial communication, but this is the initial communication, the why, these are the benefits, these are the resources we're going to offer, but then this is the support we're going to give you once you're back in office. Because all that's great, but then they get there and then what? Right? Like, if you don't have a plan for once they're actually in office, it's a disservice to your employees. So employees aren't needing perfection. They don't expect it, or at least they shouldn't. But they do need clarity. They need consistency. They need follow through. They need sincerity. I mean, kindness is free. That's one thing I always say: treat others how you want to be treated. And I think if people lived in that realm and operated with that lens, a lot of the communication misunderstandings wouldn't happen. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Thanks,
I'm very
Alicia.
passionate about that topic.
We got to talk about it. Oh my goodness. I have so many things I want to add to that, but Nicole, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing that I was thinking of, Alicia, as you were sharing all of that, and we got a question from Emily in the chat about what advice do you have for leaders that are operating in a policy that just makes no sense at a larger level. And I think a theme that we hear a lot in our work, obviously, is that middle manager and feeling stuck in the middle of like, there's this broader company-wide policy that I know doesn't make sense or I don't personally agree with. And now I'm the frontline manager having to hear all the feedback, get all the complaints, and how like it's another job for me now to manage all of these concerns. And one thing that we've seen just work really well, and I talk a lot about in my work, is um, one, obviously, as Alicia mentioned, being transparent about what is, in your control and what's not in your control, but just be human, right? Like, yes, you're frustrated that you're hearing all of this, but put yourself in the shoes of everyone and be human and connect with them on like a personal level and make them feel heard so that you can keep that trust with them. And think of yourself as an advocate sometimes in these situations, right? So, how can you build the stories, build the data, whatever may be needed to then go back to your upper management or your HR teams to advocate for what specifically needs to change within that policy or where exceptions need to be granted given just the needs that you're hearing from your direct team. And so try to see yourself in that more empowered role of like, how can I actually affect change too, even though it's hard and can feel like another job on top of everything you're managing as well. That's where we see, that change can be eventually affected in the policies. We do need to be channeling that feedback up. So that was what I thought of. Thanks, Letitia.
Yeah. Thanks, Nicole. Communication, I'm so glad that she mentioned that as well too. And that's a hard part about being a leader. Sometimes you don't even agree with what leadership is doing, but you have to come up with something that does kind of also lead into Madra's question as well. What happens when you are a people manager and that clarity didn't come from the top where the decision was made? Nicole, I think kind of, did answer that piece, but, what if there was no clarity? Is it okay for a leader to kind of come up with their own reasoning as to why they think this is happening? Should they go back to senior leadership and say, hey, our people are asking XYZ? That is something to would love to kind of hear from this group about. And y'all continue to drop your questions in the chat, please. Um, I'm gonna come back to you, Kenya, for our last question, but I think where we are in the conversation about people leaders, it is really important.
I was looking at the last question that Madra put in the chat on what advice can you provide on how to communicate those stories. I would focus, I would focus on the patterns and trends that you see, right? So instead of saying, well, John has this problem and Joe has this problem and Betty has this problem, and like lump them into buckets so that you can use it almost as like a data point, if you will. So I have, I have 10 employees. 4 of them have this issue, 3 of them have this issue, because then you're able to show patterns and trends. And oftentimes that's what leadership hears more than and it's going to sound crazy, more than the actual person that's experiencing the issue. They're so focused on data sometimes that is what gets it. And so that's what I would recommend is if you have more than one person experiencing something, or if you can draw a bridge to where you connect those buckets, that's what I would recommend. Because oftentimes the conversations that we're having as a middle manager, or at least that I've had when I was working in corporate America, they were oftentimes very related. And so it may not have been word for word the same, but it was, I could draw the line and then go to leadership on behalf. I've been that manager that advocates for my folks. I think that it is one of our roles. It's how trust is built. And so even if you have, leadership or senior leadership or whoever, you may have to have that. And I also would maybe have the conversation with the employee saying, I will take this up. I cannot guarantee it will happen, but I will go to bat for you. Right. Because even sometimes going to bat for them is all they needed. So
Thank you, Alicia. Yeah. One thing I was going to add too is as much as you all are communicating back to your employees, also get their feedback as well. Of course, they will be sharing their feedback as that's what we do as humans, but definitely, ask for their feedback because really some of those, issues, challenges, hurdles, whatever you want to call them that are coming up, probably things that your employer will need to get in front of. If it is one person saying, hey, this is a problem for me, it might be a problem for a significant amount of folks at the company. So we have covered a lot of information. I have one question for Kenya, and then I want to open it up to you all. I know you have some questions in the chat that I want to make sure we get to. So please continue to drop your questions in the chat and make sure you stay until the end, right? At 12:59 Eastern Time, we are going to drop a freebie in the chat for you all for staying that I think is going to be very helpful for you to take back to your teams. So Kenya, what can companies do to make sure that they are being inclusive and including as many folks, as many groups as possible when it comes to RTO? At Perfecta, we work with employee resource groups quite a bit. And so, that is one avenue, but definitely want to hear what your thoughts are and what you've seen to work really well.
So I think there's a two-part to this, right? Like I've seen a lot of comments about like what managers can do and how do senior managers support junior managers. And we've all been saying kind of the same things, right? I think first, companies need to have a framework. What does that look like, right? So that it allows for those middle managers to have the autonomy that they need in order to help make those decisions within the guardrails that have been set. So whether it's, for example, Alicia just said someone wants to come in and work a 9 to 6, but the hours of the office are 8:30 to 5:30. There should be something a part of that framework that allows them to kind of make that decision themselves and say, okay, it's not bad that we shifted 30 minutes. I saw some questions in the chat where people were asking about getting mileage and getting and increasing your pay because you're coming back and forth to the office when that wasn't the case initially. And I also think that that's something that organizations should have considered should be a part of the framework, right? Like what does that look like? What does that mean? I know a lot of companies had a mandate where if you moved over 50 miles, then you didn't have to come into the office. So like kind of bringing those things up to your senior manager and having those discussions, even prompting them a little further. Maybe it goes into HR and so forth and so on. And then when we start to talk about like the biases that happen, I always think about training. How did we train our managers when it comes to managing a hybrid workforce? Because it's not the same as it is when you're managing all in office people. You have things like proximity bias that starts to creep up. Like just because the person is physically in your space and you get to walk past and see that so-and-so is sitting at their desk, you automatically assume, oh, they're working. But you don't know that with someone who's hybrid, who you only interact with through Slack or through Teams or whatever that is. So being mindful of what that proximity bias looks like, and making sure that you set a clear standard for how you're communicating and receiving updates from them on their work and their workflow. You don't want to micromanage your team. You need to be very mindful of that, but you want to make sure that you've established a clear way that you feel like you understand what they've been doing. And usually I always tell people to set like a standard agenda format. I always say put in there something that starts off with your roses and thorns. So what are some things that have went great since the last time we met? What are some things that have been some challenges? What are some project updates, high level project updates? Where do you need resources and support from me? What can I do? And what are some of those random things that I just need to know? Like, I don't know, maybe it's your daughter's birthday, so you're going to need to cut out a little bit earlier this day. Those are some of those things that kind of tie the pieces together and make you feel just as connected to those people that aren't in the office as you do to the people that are in the office. I also think just being really aware of the care biases, as we've all talked about, is like being caregivers, being parents. I know many of us may be in a space where we are taking care of aging parents. They will drive you through the wall for any of us that are going through it. Adulting adults is tough. And it means that you might have to show up for doctor's appointments that maybe a year ago you weren't showing up for. So having that flexibility as a manager to allow people that time where they don't have to put in PTO, but they're making up for that. They're able to step away from their desk and go to those appointments without feeling like they're going to be punished in some way. So that builds into like that culture of feeling like you are allowing people to show up in their most authentic way, that they have the resources that they need to feel supported, that you are showing up for them and supporting them. And it's not about being performative, because we can all say the really great words, but how are your actions showing up? Like it's that thing where someone says, oh, my daughter is sick. You say, oh, I'm so sorry, but did my report get done? Hold on, wait, back up. You didn't allow them the space to sit in whatever it was that they were feeling and truly hear them. And then ask, like, how can you support them? What can you help take off of their workload to help them feel like they have the time to step into what they need to? Because when you do not feel like you have that work-life balance, that's when things start to suffer. And by nature, you're going to lean more heavily into the things that are more personal to you than your work. But it doesn't mean you don't care about your work. It's just personal life just kind of takes the priority, even if you don't mean it to. So I think as managers, we just have to be really, really mindful of like how we're showing up, how we're building that authenticity and that communication. And then if you're seeing trends, as everyone has said, then you want to raise those things up. You don't want to go back to like senior leadership and say, John said, absolutely not. But you do want to go back and say, hey, I'm seeing some things that may be impacting my team and it's likely impacting other people. Also, if you're a manager, talk to the other managers. I am certain that if you're seeing it, they're seeing it. And that may be a good space for you all to connect and talk about like, how do we support our team? And I mean, I hate to say it this way, but there's power in numbers. If 10 or 15 managers are all saying this is an issue that they're facing and they raise it up to senior leadership, there's some stance there that they're going to have to take and try to help with some of the resources. So I think just being mindful of like where the culture sits and the biases and things of that nature is really, really important. And just having that open communication and dialogue and not being performative and how you're showing up for your team.
Thanks, Kenya. I love everything that you said, especially for those managers and getting with other managers. That's something that's not talked about enough. I want to just highlight ERGs for a second. Um, ERGs are identity-based groups. If I have any ERG leaders, or if there are any ERG leaders that are in the Zoom room, just a show of hands, say yes in the chat if you are part of an ERG, if you're a leader of an ERG. Those ERGs are there to advocate for you. So if you're part of a women's ERG, if you're part of a caregiver's ERG, which is what Kenya was just talking about, right? They are there to support you. So bring those challenges to your ERG leader, or if you are an ERG leader, make sure you're advocating on behalf of your community's challenges that relate to RTO. I want to shout out one of our clients, RBO Health, which is a health tech company headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. They are actually partnering with their ERGs to roll out some in-office programming. So it's a great way to bring visibility bring visibility to your ERGs. But if you are an ERG leader, a lot of our ERG groups or ERGs that we're working with are trying to figure out like how can I actually use this RTO to support our in-office engagement efforts, right? How can you use it to reach more folks? So if you are an ERG, there is definitely an opportunity for you to support and advocate for your community, but also bring more visibility.